I'm delighted to be part of this tribute to Jessie Lendennie and to congratulate her on the longevity of Salmon Poetry, which brought diversity to Irish poetry publishing at a time when it was very much needed. So, Gamara she, agus Gamara Salmon Poetry. In Ostia, August 2020. My first night in Italy since the whole world changed. And what has changed? The taxi driver overcharges. He drives me past the ruins of the port and the Papal Tower to the hotel where they remember me, but also, as before, think I am German. Because of my hair? Because I am old and travelling alone? There is food and a glass, and I am alone on the warm terrace looking out on the small pool and the sunset. As before, a cat appears exactly as the sun goes down, and a kind of mechanical crab with a long flex that arches like a snake swimming begins to crawl around the bottom of the pool, bangs its nose off the tiles, recoils, and begins again.
Hello, my name is Nessa O'Mahony and I am co-editor with Alan Hayes of a new book of poetry called Days of Clear Light, which is an absolutely delightful anthology of poetry marking the 40th anniversary of the Irish press, Salmon, the Irish Poetry Publishing Press, and in particular celebrating the achievement of the woman who has been behind Salmon for those 40 years, Jessie Lendennie, who I'm joined with tonight. And we're going to have a chat really about that life and that career in poetry. And we're going to hear as we go along some of Jessie's poems, because she's as well as being a publisher, she's a very fine poet in her own right. So Jessie, thank you very much for joining us here for the Irish Literary Society's launch of Days of Clear Light. Lovely to see you. You're in Liscannor, County Clare. No, not Lahinch.
Up near the cliffs.
Near the cliffs.
More.
Very much, and we can picture the light on the Atlantic.
Oh yes, it's beautiful. Actually, I'm looking out over a field at the moment from the, and it's beautiful.
Very
the
good.
Donkeys, you know, the usual.
But you didn't grow up there. You actually started your days over in Mr. Clinton's neck of the woods, over in Arkansas, in the US. Yeah. So tell us a bit about that journey. You know, how did you find poetry over in the US?
Well, you see, poetry finds you, doesn't it? And I remember literally now we're talking about the first memory being in the middle of cotton fields. We lived in my mother picked cotton, etc. My father did various things, but road maintenance and that kind of thing. You know, we weren't, it's very complicated. My mother was a little bit considered by a family to be a bit of a cut above my father's family, but in fact, it was my father who had the farm and the land and etc. But the Irish drink comes into the story, you know, but ridiculous cliche growing up with that straight away. And McNamara's band, dancing around to McNamara's band.
And was the poetry? Was the poetry?
Just the immediate thing that comes to me is sitting in the dirt making mud pies, looking across the horizon now, because you're talking quite like in any kind of huge space, like, you know, looking out of the sea. So to me, that was looking out of this land, and I would just sit there, just thinking, just being there. And that would be sort of 4 years old or so. And then by the time we'd moved into town, I just loved making up sounds and thinking about places. And I happened to have a third grade teacher. One always has these third grade teachers who encouraged me. And I would get up, I would always want to be standing in front of the class reciting, seriously, like, you know, the village blacksmith, and the highwayman came riding. And so that I loved that. And there's a lot of music in my family, not me, but again, you get the rhythm. And that rhythm, even in so-called blank or free verse, you know you've got your rhythm, you have to have that. But it was just always in my head, always.
But you mentioned on the night that we launched this in Ireland that it was your mum's death. You were 14, weren't you, when she died? That really kind of introduced poetry into your life in a real way. In
a big, as I was getting older, we'd moved to California by then, and Hawthorne, California, went to school with the Beach Boys, that kind of thing. Anyway, seriously, but that I didn't like that environment, because in Arkansas there had been seasons, and you could have the beautiful autumn leaves, and I was given to melancholy. I am anyway, despite. But then when my mother died, that's it, gone, everything gone, and not a good relationship with the rest of my family. And so we used to get the Saturday Evening Post, and I'd be, following the poems there, and I'd go to the library, big reader, which is something my mother really encouraged. And I just, because there was no person to actually reflect what I felt, but, I could read these poems, and in one in particular, and I've often wondered who the author was, I can't remember, something about not welcoming April any longer. Wow. And that's, my mother died in April. And that was, it was like the world that you knew you couldn't see it. You didn't know the person, but it was there. It was the world that you could belong to just by being in it, just by entering into it.
Yeah.
And
it's interesting how many poets talk about the moment that they hear something that they recognize themselves in, and Seamus Heaney talking about hearing Patrick Kavanagh's recordings on vinyl and realizing that there was a place to talk about the farming life in poetry, because that's what Heaney started in and knew. But listening to Kavanagh makes him realize there's a place. So
there aren't these poetry subjects, because that stopped me for a while. Okay, but poetry has to be written in such a way, it has to be a certain thing, and how could I, again, this working class girl from Arkansas, couldn't afford to go to college in the States, how would I be in that? That was so as far away from me as anything I could imagine, and yet it wasn't, and yet, there it is, you're part of. So I went to a lot of this kind of, as we did, the whole, the political stuff, and
because this was the 60s. I mean, I'm
writing a lot of it.
This was the 60s, wasn't it? Yeah. So like you have the whole beat movement going on, and
I mean,
city lights in San Francisco.
I would like to. Well, I was in San Francisco, but now we're probably all lying about our ages now at this stage, but we cannot, but you could. But it was such an amazing time. It sincerely was. And I'm not looking back like, oh, well, because I was young. Woo-hoo. I mean, I was a lunatic. But there's so much happened. And so I wanted to go to London from the time I was around 15. So, and I had no reason not to, no family. So I just decided, okay. But then I wound up being in California, having a stupid job and bad relationship. Anyway, so then one day I said, okay, going to New York, and I knew this woman who said, okay, let's do it. So we went to New York, and it was incredible. And there'd never be, even like going to London. And needless to say, going to Ireland was more like being home. But as far as the difference, New York was the place. It was amazing. And I'd never seen a street market before. walking around, wandering. Anyway, all sorts of mad adventures.
And was
then,
there a poetry scene? Were you going to poetry events? Can you remember people?
Yeah,
Frank O'Hara, was
the
he
main
making it?
thing, no, the main thing, no, you see, I missed a lot of people. I missed, you see, I really had wanted to be a beatnik.
Yeah.
That was the other that was the earlier generation. So I read Kerouac and I read this and that, but you know, okay, what do you get when you read those guys? These stories are about men. The women were tagging along. So like I did when I was younger, I have two older brothers. I identified as a man. I mean, I just identified what, okay, I'm going to do this. You tell me I can't do it. I'm going to do it. And so it didn't put me off that this was all men, you know, and Walt Whitman and all the people what we learned in school. I don't remember one woman, not one, no Anne Sexton, no Emily Dixon, no. Carl Sandburg, you know, a lot of very, at that time, what people might even see as a kind of an indoctrination and you know, in school in a very, very American, but then of course all countries see that presumably.
But in the 80s,
that's what it is.
Absolutely,
you know?
in the 80s in UCD, I was not studying any living writers, you know, Irish or otherwise, and there was one woman, and it was Emily Dickinson. So it's.
Well, you were lucky.
That's another conversation. But
indeed. Yeah.
So what took you from New York to London then?
Well, I'd always, you know, that was my goal, but unfortunately I had, you know, a little bit of a delay with being pregnant. And mainly hung around musicians and gay people. I'd never met anyone gay before. It's like this, oh my God, that's fantastic. Oh, it really was. That was, and you could actually, as I had done, walk from one end of Manhattan to another at 2 a.m. And never, I know there was sort of in the 70s, Giuliani, and, you know, and the whole cleanup of, you know, whatever. But but New York was absolutely wonderful. Not so wonderful when you've got a baby and you're getting evicted. And your partner doesn't feel like paying the rent, and so there you are, all of a sudden from the East Village, living in the Bronx, and having to go to work and have weird childminders. So I thought, no, got to get out of here. The sooner the better. So I did one thing and another with help from my sister who lived in Alabama at the time and looking after Tim. And then I just got together the money and took off. What at that time, I'm certain was a one-way ticket, $300 and one bag, and Tim, who was 2.
Baby on the hip. And did you have any sense of what you wanted to do? Like, were you now focusing on poetry, or?
I wanted to go to college. And I remember saying that to various people who said, oh my God, you know, when I got to London, are you kidding me, right? So within like a year, I was in King's College in London. I just wanted to do it. I effing did it. Excuse me. I did it.
And what were you studying?
Philosophy. Philosophy was the closest I could get to the kind of, as I thought, because I was also looking at mystical, the Eastern philosophy at the same time. But you know what you get at that time in King's College London is sort of John Locke and and sort of total and utter, what was his name, Freddie Eyre, totally empiricist, that stuff. And the only person I could really relate were the Greeks. I like the Greeks, and Simone Weil, the mid 20th century philosopher. Who was amazing. And so that was going to be my concentration. I was going to do an MA, but then I didn't. But then at that point, then I'd met Michael Allen, and we decided really, I was teaching. I worked in the Poetry Society. So if you're just talking about poetry, it's okay. I worked in the Poetry Society after college. And it was also, I don't know if it's me or not, but I'm dragging these things around, but it was an amazingly crazy time in the Poetry Society. There were there's books about it actually. They were the us and them thing of the concrete poets, as it's called, sound poets,
Yeah.
who were intent on overthrowing the stateness of the Poetry Society. And so they would do these things like they'd, sort of have these gigs and they'd break up the piano and throw books around and wind up sleeping, in cupboards and, and the housekeeper who had been there for 40 years, this is in Earl's Court Square.
Yeah.
She decided that she couldn't take it anymore and she left. And because Tim and I were kind of at a bit of a loose end, as we often were with our accommodation, after we were in the squat for 4 years anyway, and so we were at a loose end, and so the person I was working with, Pamela Clooney's Ross, said, "Oh, look, why don't you and Tim come and take the upstairs
like caretakers,
apartment.
Yeah.
Take over there." Luckily it didn't involve a lot of cleaning, but it did involve looking after the readings and stuff. And there were very interesting people. One person I remember coming, who was the first woman I'd seen there, Fleur Adcock.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah. And it's funny, Tim was there. Tim was at that time, it was probably 10, something like that, 10 or 11. And he was absolutely enthralled with her, and she was great. But it was just.
But women readers were a rarity.
Oh yeah.
Still.
Oh, definitely. I'm probably going to have somebody say that's not true, but this is, and again, this is my
memory. Yeah.
My memory, my little thing, because I was struggling with a lot of things at the time, and what else I was going to be doing with my life, and I couldn't stay. But I didn't like it there because they'd changed their management. The Arts Council as a kind of SOP. Decided to put a businessman in who was going to sort of sort things out.
Yeah.
Just kind of like the Americans who voted for Trump might have been thinking.
Okay,
He and I did, oh my God, we didn't get on. And again, I was writing and I was showing my poetry to some of these guys, all guys there now.
Yeah.
Me and Pamela. Well, the administrative staff were women. And showing things, and they didn't want to know. They wanted me to listen to their stuff, and I thought, oh God. So anyway, I did a postgrad teaching thing and started teaching, and moved quite close to the Troubadour, as is near also in Earl's Court.
Yeah.
And started teaching, which I absolutely hated. I was in difficult schools. I loved the kids, hated the admin. Anyway, wasn't writing very much. And then I met Michael Allen, and we were both introduced by somebody who lived in our building, and whatever. And so we decided together to come to Ireland. That's where the toing and froing stops. Because also at that time I was publishing in again, when we were in the squat in the early 70s, I was publishing in London, and I had a poem in Stand, and I'd met John Silken, but years earlier.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I and Michael and I thought, okay, where can we go that we would have a creative life? And
it was the west of Ireland.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we chose. It was going to be the west. It wouldn't have been Dublin, but it would have been. So we went camping around, looking at spots, and then chose Galway.
Mm-hmm. So
maybe,
this is 1981, and in the anthology, Des Kenny of the very famous Galway bookshop, Kenny's, has a memory of you arriving in sometime in 1981 and talking to Mrs. Kenny, the mammy and the sort of the matriarch of the bookshop, and presenting her with presumably a photocopied journal that you had produced, and saying, there you go now, this is the start of something big. So I'm just
hyperbole
by the chutzpah of somebody who comes in, but you knew what you were talking about, because it was the start of something.
Yeah, because again, one thing I learned from the Poetry Society, which is actually good, and poetry in general, was that there needed to be a voice for people who weren't getting out there. And if there's one thing, and again, I've thought about this, and me more so than Michael, I felt this kind of, oh God, this is a vision. This is got to do this. I'm gonna go and we're gonna start a journal. But you know, these things, I really am a big believer in synchronicity and serendipity. And it was the time. It was just the time. And we arrived in August, and then within a couple of weeks, we saw there was a workshop starting up at UCG, and vaguely with the English department and Tom Kilroy, very vaguely. I mean, you know, loosely. And a meeting in the ladies club, which is a building just on the ladies club. And so in there, and deciding, you know, okay, look, we're going to need to take this bigger. We need to publish our stuff. We need to get, you know, like people do, like you do.
Yeah, because there were other.
So happened then that people like Rita Ann Higgins happened upon, and she said she was deciding whether she was going to take an astronomy class and buy a telescope, or she was going to be writing and carrying on with her writing. And Michael and I both said, gosh, okay, this is a voice to know. This is, she's got something to say. And then everyone there did. But it was, and you know, then you get Eva Burke after. Oh, anyway, no, I'll start going crazy now with people. But it was just,
was it a very simple kind of move? It sounds like it was a very natural progression then from a journal to here are these extraordinary people who need books. We're going to make those books. Yeah.
Well, Michael and I split up just after we did a couple of books, I think, as Sam, and he was moving more in a political direction, and I was, you know, I just wanted to focus. It was going to be, you know, it was going to be my life. I wasn't thinking, oh God, how am I going to get by with supporting Tim or blah, blah, blah. You know, it was very clear and very time consuming. So we wouldn't have a lot of time to and I got an enormous amount of kind of, I was going to say notoriety. I mean, attention, because there weren't people coming out with books in the west of Ireland. And there was, and the Arts Council, Lark Cassidy at the time, very much behind us. He really liked Rita Ann. He loved Eva, and he loved, you know, Moya. That they're all, you know, it so happened. You see, it's like it so happened that it was Lark Cassidy.
Yeah.
You know, it could have been some dyed-in-the-wool stuffed shirt like had been at the Poetry Society.
Yeah.
Dyed-in-the-wool stuffed shirt.
Well, listen,
no, anyway,
maybe
you know what I mean.
Maybe there's a natural pause here, because we were sort of talking earlier about maybe hearing some of your poems as we go on. So I'm just wondering, is there a poem that suggests itself to you at this point in the conversation?
Well, since I was talking about Michael, I've got some Cotton Fields poems. I'm not going to read that. This is Walking Here. I don't
lift it up more.
Own...
We lift it up higher so we can actually see the cover. Lovely.
Walking Here, yeah, it's one of my photos that I haven't done a lot of my own poetry. You know, have published anthologies and stuff and books on poetry, but I, you know, again, maybe the thing of, well, I don't know. No, I think I'm happy with that humility. Really, I am. I'm not going to say, oh, it's because I'm just downtrodden. Anyway, this is Yellow Weeds. I was written in the what's called South Park now in Galway, which at that time we called it the swamp. Yellow weeds. Sun through the poor yellow weeds blew above the houses, and a wind sharp as a blade of grass stretched on this flat stone and the half sun, warmth before rain. What did you say that I believed that now makes us as separate as the wind from this place? I am past caring, as if to say, look how this wall curves out to scoop the bottom from the sea.
Gorgeous, gorgeous.
And
you can see that sort of, you know, that visual ability that you have both in your words and in your pictures to just sort of get that light, that moment.
Frustrated painter.
But it sounds very American to me. It sounds very American in terms of that kind of poetic line. And I'm going to talk to you in a minute about, because you publish both American and Irish poets, and how does that blend ever, or how that goes. But so the relationship with Mike is over. You're there. You've got your vision. How then do the next couple of decades go?
Well, being me, then I with a lovely, then Siobhan Hudson, who is absolutely the most wonderful designer, and what would I call it? Rock. She was the girlfriend of my son, of Tim. She was Tim's girlfriend. So I've known her since she was around 18. And at a time, I don't know how it came up, but it was just me really then. And so I needed someone to help with Salmon stuff. So she did that, to kind of, the usual sort of young person does around businesses when they get, anyway. And so that got she was more and more involved. And that, even though she and Tim had a hiatus, and he went off to the States to see, after college, to see whether he actually liked it or not. His dad was there. And so Siobhan kept working with me, and I thought, okay, well, we get out of the house in the Claddagh, my little house, my oldest house in the Claddagh that I loved, and got an office in the Bridge Mills. Okay, strike one. 400 pounds a month, 400 pounds of the mortgage. Okay, lovely. So we started doing more as well. And for a time, I kind of inherited this bookshop from a friend of mine, also in the Bridge Mills. Strike three. Then we get all the attention, the Irish Times and Connaught Tribune, everywhere. A lot of stuff on Mike Murphy, and a lot of radio, a lot of attention. Okay, so what does Jessie do? Okay, well, we have to keep going. We have to keep books. We have to keep publishing books. There was a printer, I won't say who, and he was very tolerant. So okay, so 50,000 pounds later, over trading. Woo! So I was in trouble.
Yeah.
And not that the books weren't, the poets weren't, that whatever.
The business model just wasn't.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I pride myself actually as a non-business person on finding a name for it. At the time, of course, it was also 1993, 92. Things were dipping, and the banks wouldn't even let me in.
Yeah.
So
So this is where Pool Beg came into the picture, was it?
Yes, but the way that happened, I have to give credit now. Again, this is luck, I don't know, whatever. But Theo Dorgan published a book of Theo's, and he was doing a poetry program. So he said, come on the program and tell people what happened. And I did. And I got a call from Philip McDermott of Pool Beg Press saying, oh, do you want to come under umbrella? And other people, I was still doing stuff, trying to figure out what to do. And other people were offering help. But this would have, as it did, get people off my back who were looking for money that I didn't have.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to keep the house. I was able, but again, Philip was looking for, that kind of, he was interested. I think he genuinely wanted to kind of help me out. But also Salmon did have, a cachet. Salmon did have something. We were getting a bit from the Arts Council, which they increased under the Pool Beg thing. But it was chalk and cheese, it was, and in the end, they realized that they actually couldn't really sell the poetry It didn't, you know, it just, and I found out also later that no one in Poolbeg wanted Philip to take Salmon
Sure.
on.
Yeah.
And there I was I'd be going up into these meetings, still living in Galway and going up to Dublin and being quite frankly narky because I was caught between what Philip wanted and, you know, he'd created his own empire, you know, so no, but you know, but they did get they didn't pay anything to anybody, but they got people off my back. And then
So
after years, then Philip said, oh, okay, look, take it back.
yeah.
And I did. And I moved Claire at the same time.
Now, it could have gone two ways at that point. It could have been, okay, do you know, that was a good experiment, but I'm done with it.
Mhm.
Or, do you know, I'm going to keep going and I'm going to make it bigger.
Yeah.
And
Would never, I did publish, and I gave the idea then to go back to some, as was happening at the time, a few alternative books like creative astrology and something else. I don't, 4 books altogether. But I found that people writing the alternative books, at least the ones I met, were cuckoo. Really, they were much harder to deal with. But anyway, so I thought, okay, might have this sort of little Auburn House thing going. But I was very tired and very depressed. But I thought, no, I can't. You know, when Philip said, look, because I didn't know if I could get something back or not.
Mm.
So, and then Philip just said, look, you know, take it back. So.
and
Moving.
one of the things,
and then yeah.
I was just going to say that one of the things that you'd been observing in London in you know, and an earlier period about the sort of the shortage of women as readers or writers. Like certainly when I came to know you first, which would have been in the 90s, in the mid to late 90s, it was still an environment where there were very few women being published. And I think my first publication with you was the large anthology, The White Page, that Joan McBreen edited, which was of, you know, every woman in the country who had had at least one collection published. And it was, you know, as much to say, we're here. There may not be a lot of official attention, but we're here. And Salmon was the press to do that, to kind of show the rest of the world.
Well, it was the only thing to do, Nessa, wasn't it? It was the only thing to do. It was the only thing to do. And you know, and okay, you know, was it 106, 109 women in White Page?
Enormous book.
And that's the 20th century. But sorry, the 20th century.
Yeah.
20th century. And half of them, almost, a good number of them actually didn't publish until the 80s and was Salmon. And that's, and one thing glaringly then, another interest of mine was not, it would, you know, it's quite easy to see that I would be interested, working class women. And women, you know, like Rita Han, who had those kind of voices. And Goddess on the Movie Bus was the second book that we'd published in the 80s. And then Eva Burke's Gonella was the first, and 2 very contrasting poets. But again, that's always been my interest, though, working class women, young, you know, You know,
we're talking in 2021, and there is still the debate about the lack of diversity, the lack of, you know, class diversity in poetry. So, I mean, is that still part of your strong sense as a publisher that you know, diversity?
Yeah, one of our one of the people we published, Kevin Simmons, who's gay, and he's Black and fine, because I love him, to really, really, really care about him a lot. He said, are you going to make an effort to have more Black people? I said, well, yes, you know, yeah, of course. And all sorts of people. But then again, you have to have the poetry coming out too. They have to match. And I would definitely be on the look. I'm always on the lookout for certain types of writers.
But you're not ticking boxes.
No, you can't. I mean, I know that people who say, I'm affirmative action, absolutely. And gender, of course, you know, good grief. Again, look at my generation. And it was, you know, knowing what everybody went through, knowing, blessing myself that I didn't have to be a 1950s housewife, because again, that was an earlier generation. I didn't get to be a beatnik, but you know, but so I do see that, but I wouldn't, and we do have some, again, and I'm back to my, you know, perhaps I never learned anything. I still want to do more than is probably feasible. And that way, if it was up to me, if I had like, you know, even God, even 500,000, don't even, we'd have the most diverse, fabulous, wonderful poetry press in the world.
But you're also publishing in 2 continents, which I think is something that we haven't really touched on yet. Like you've got a very large American stable alongside a very large sort of Ireland and Europe and a bit of Australia.
Canadian, and Australian, I want to do with Anne Casey. I'd really like to do this anthology of contemporary Australian women poets. But again, with the pandemic and all of that, I've had to postpone books. Now the list is looking massive, and you know, but all I want to do is hang on, you know, hang on and keep going.
And the things that make you most proud, I suppose, either looking back or currently, what are the things as a publisher that you're most proud of?
Now, this is not to say anything at all about all the poets you published. That I so love everything that we've published, and of course I do. But I would say Rita Ann Higgins. That if somebody could say, was there a mission statement about Salmon? There she is. And she after publishing with us, then and very much a mutual agreement about her needing to get out of Ireland a bit. So then she's published with Pullbeck as well. Pullbeck, oh my God. Sorry, no, Blood Axe as well. Blood Axe, sorry, Neil. She, but we have published a couple of memoirs, and we've recently publishing her
book of essays.
Book, And so Rita and I are very close, and all the poets who, Mary O'Malley and Moya and and Eva Burke and Joan, they're still there.
And when we approach many of these people and they're in the book, and never have I uncovered such goodwill and delight and absolute enjoyment in the fact that here finally they were going to get a chance to say to you, thank you so much for everything that you have done. I thought it would be kind of like herding cats. It was the most wonderfully easy job to get 100 or so people together in the one book over a 3-month period, not letting you know anything about it, just so that we could.
It was the biggest shock of my life. Oh God!
Make this thing. So we're going to hear some more poems from this. Some contributors are dialing in their poems a little later, but it would be lovely to hear a couple more poems from you.
Okay, would I read two? There's one. I don't actually have it with me, one of my favorite ones, and I don't want to recite it in case I forget it in mid-sentence. But would I try?
Yeah, go on. What's the worst can happen?
Oh God. Okay, then I'll turn to another if I forget it. Okay. It's called Aliens, and it's for Eve, my granddaughter. Siobhan is now Siobhan I mentioned earlier being the girlfriend. Siobhan is now the wife of my son. So lucky me, lucky Tim,
lucky all of us.
Lucky everybody. Okay, for Eve, aliens. There's space aliens in the trees in my backyard. Only there aren't any trees, just mud and rocky holes made by stone-mad dogs digging for dog gold. And once I went out at 3 a.m. and a dissolving star told me that I had only one lifetime left. And I thought of meeting you in another country, you laughing, saying my middle name, Aline, is alien in disguise. And I thought of all the trees I'd never live in. I thought of all the years spent digging for stars, watching their alien sparkle drift through the holes in the sky. Sinead.
Gorgeous, gorgeous. And great that a dog appeared, because there are many, many mentions of dogs in this book and in others. You produced this wonderful anthology of dog poetry not that long ago as well.
Dog singing, yeah. And
yeah. Do you have another one for us?
Paula Meehan has a lovely piece in there about her celebrity dog.
She does absolutely, because she had a poem in the anthology, and
Yeah,
that the dog in that poem subsequently died.
Yeah.
And yes, indeed, everything is connected and interconnected. I'm writing about your dogs and my dog in it as well. So, do you have another poem?
Well, this is me going back to London after being away for a long time, and it was just before the election, just before Barack Obama, and anyway. But this is nothing about him either. But anyway, it was November. Flying in November. In the sky now, and the thought goes on, returning, not returning, belonging, not as if I'd always been, but as a kindred on a journey, going to visit a past which shaped me, which is me when I wasn't in another world. How far back and why? When leaving was romantic, on the road again. And all it took was an open mind and willingness to imagine. Now Ireland from the air looks like the dreams one has of falling and drifting, clouds lifted by sun, not magic, but promise of a sort.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, listen, I think we've come more or less to the end of the time that we had. I could ask you about ambitions for the future, but we're all making plans and cancelling them. So you know.
Oh, we'll keep going. We'll have a big celebration of the 40th in the States too, and everywhere else.
And there's a certain big birthday in August.
Now, I just wanted to say, actually, the American. I was going to say that kind of voice, that kind of. I love the narrative thing, but you know what influences Robert Frost and Walt Whitman, because that's what I had at a time that was very impressive, and Frost's very unusual cadences.
Yeah.
You know, yeah,
I mean, it's the Whitman thing is extraordinary. I don't know whether I was entirely wrong, but I was listening to Amanda Gorman doing her inaugural poem and hearing Whitman, you know, hearing all those, you know, this country is me kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the reach is very long, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very long. Well, listen, it has been such a pleasure to talk to you. This is a gorgeous book. It is going to be available widely in bookshops when restrictions are lifted, but in the meantime it is very much accessible via the Salmon website.
Our distributor in the UK is Impress.
Very good. And, very good.
But the website.
So here's to another 40 years, Jessie.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm so glad you're not referencing my ageness.
Certainly not. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nessa. Thank you.
Happy anniversary, Salmon, and many congratulations to you, Jessie, for all your hard work over the years.
Come what may. The gull screams mean sunrise, and even though I've heard it 100 times before, still surprise, somewhere between alarm and panic. Or else the soaring, freewheeling bird really hasn't a care in the world, but for this brand new day. Come what may, it cries. Come what may. Happy anniversary Jessie, and to all at Salmon. Best wishes.
My name is Martina Evans, and this is my contribution to the Days of Clear Light poetry anthology, which was published on the occasion of Jessie Lendennie's birthday, and it's a tribute to 40 wonderful years of her famous Salmon Poetry press. Barium Swallow. What was I doing there, the family fumbler, the dreamy one, where every mistake meant another spray of radiation, and doctors lashing, senior radiographers on 10 feet stilts, in at 8 a.m. in my white uniform, my wide blue belt clasped, shaking up the chalky strawberry-flavoured barium drinks before the patient was strapped to the table and spun fairground style. The radiologist watching the image intensifier, tracking the passage of food, radiographers watching the radiologist, the cassettes and the kilovoltage, turning the huge Flash Gordon dials. Dr. O'Mahony shouting, "Drink greedily," I said. The skeleton opened its lantern jaw, and I saw not the opaque river showing the faults in the digestive system, 20th century style, but a medieval image of the time that I was losing there every day.
Hello, my name's Jane Clark, and I'm delighted to be part of this celebration of Jessie. It's so important to mark what she's done for poetry and how her vision and courage 40 years ago continues to make a difference today. I'm going to read my poem from Days of Clear Light, and it's inspired by a border collie we had as children, The Lookout. Neither wind nor rain would stop him lying in wait on the garden wall, an hour or more, till he spotted the yellow school bus at the top of the road. When he heard us, laughing, shouting, squabbling, he'd jump barking to the gravel and run to gather his flock of 5. The evening he arrived in the kitchen, the runt from our uncle's best collie. He had peed on the tiles, but never again until near the end, when his legs wouldn't carry him to the back door. Long after he'd taught us what he knew about love that waits in the wind and rain. Thank you.
I'm going to read my poem in the anthology Days of Clear Light, the tribute volume to Jessie Lendennie. And it's actually about visiting her in her home in Knockevin on the Cliffs of Moher. It's called Visiting the Publisher. Knockevin, 2014. This is how I remember it. The slow bends up from Doolin, the sky widening, the sense of an edge somewhere, a sweep of cliffs when we went too far, missing the turning for the Boreen, the donkeyed field. Then a low wall and a bungalow. And suddenly it was all whirl, pulse after pulse of collie energy, nails scrabbling on the floor as the pack raced from one side to the other. You couldn't tell where one dog ended, another began in tail and rump and hair, tongues lolling in juggernaut joy, past chicanes of books and boxes, and back again for yet another circuit. I'm sure there was much to talk about, portents and poets and slim volumes, but I don't remember that. I do recall your smile, your contented shrug as a leaf blew and the pack took off again.